It was a quiet, unassuming town nestled in the heart of Vermont, where everyone knew everyone's business. The kind of place where gossip spread like wildfire and secrets rarely remained buried. The local fire department was the pride of the community, led by Chief Alan Hawthorne, a well-respected man in his early 50s. His dedication to the job and his calm, authoritative presence had earned him the admiration of both his colleagues and the townspeople. Alan had been with the department for over 25 years, and under his leadership, the team was like a family. But beneath this seemingly idyllic setting, tensions simmered, ready to erupt. Alan's wife, Emily, was the quintessential chief's spouse. Beautiful, graceful, and always present at community events, she'd been married to Alan for 20 years. The couple had no children, a topic that had been the subject of much speculation. Emily, in her mid-40s, still turned heads wherever she went, but those who looked closely noticed the strain behind her bright smile. Her marriage to Alan was far from perfect, marred by years of emotional neglect and Alan's increasing obsession with his job. Then came Ryan Carter, the new recruit. A young firefighter in his late 20s with chiseled features and a magnetic charm, he quickly became the talk of the town. Ryan had moved to Vermont after leaving his previous job in Boston under mysterious circumstances. His athletic build and easygoing nature made him a hit among his colleagues, and even the chief seemed to take a liking to the eager young man. Emily, however, saw something different in Ryan. What began as casual conversations at department gatherings soon evolved into something more. Emily found herself drawn to his youthful energy and the way he looked at her, not as the fire chief's wife, but as a desirable woman. The spark she had longed for in her marriage ignited, and before long they were meeting in secret. The affair was intoxicating, consuming them both with a passion that neither had experienced before. They met in the shadows, in hotel rooms miles away, stealing whatever moments they could. But secrets have a way of unraveling, and theirs was no exception. It was on a rainy November evening that things began to spiral out of control. Chief Hawthorne had noticed changes in Emily, her unexplained absences, the way she seemed more vibrant, and her sudden interest in fitness. But he dismissed his suspicions as paranoia, blaming it on the stress of his demanding job. However, the whispers in the department grew louder. Unconfirmed rumors of Emily and Ryan meeting outside the firehouse, spotted together at a secluded diner on the outskirts of town, were passed around like hot coals. The tight-knit camaraderie that once bound the team began to fray, with people taking sides even before the truth was fully known. Then came the fire at the old Henderson warehouse. A routine call turned deadly when Ryan, in an act of reckless bravery, rushed into the burning building without backup. He emerged, carrying an unconscious man over his shoulder, just as the roof caved in behind him. The town hailed him as a hero, and Emily couldn't hide her admiration. For Alan, it was the breaking point. In the midst of the applause and accolades, he saw it. The brief yet unmistakable exchange of looks between his wife and Ryan. Consumed by jealousy and rage, Alan decided to confront Ryan, but his seasoned instincts held him back. Instead, he began his own quiet investigation, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle he desperately wished wasn't true. He went through Emily's phone records, followed her discreetly, and soon the truth hit him like a sledgehammer. The affair was real. On a cold December night, Alan sat alone in his study, staring at the damning evidence laid out before him. Text messages, hotel receipts, and photographs. He felt a surge of betrayal, humiliation, and a desire for revenge that frightened even him. But the methodical chief knew better than to act impulsively. He needed a plan, one that would rid him of this disgrace and restore his shattered pride. 2 weeks later, the plan was set in motion. Ryan received an anonymous tip about a fire hazard at the abandoned Grant farmhouse, a few miles outside of town. It was odd, but not unheard of. The town's dilapidated buildings often attracted vandals, and with the holidays approaching, everyone was on edge. Alan made sure he was on duty that night. When the call came through, he volunteered to go along, much to everyone's surprise. "Why don't you stay back, Chief? We can handle it," Ryan had offered. But Alan insisted, masking his intentions with a stern smile. As they pulled up to the dark, deserted farmhouse, the tension was palpable. The air was thick with anticipation, and Ryan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. Alan motioned for him to check the rear of the building while he took the front. Ryan hesitated, sensing something off. but the chief's unwavering gaze left no room for argument. The farmhouse loomed ominously as Ryan made his way around the back. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing broken windows and boarded-up doors. He was just about to turn the corner when he heard it, a faint sound, like the crackle of dry leaves coming from inside. He took a step closer, his heart pounding in his ears, and then everything went black. When Ryan regained consciousness, he was lying on the cold, hard ground inside the abandoned farmhouse. His head throbbed painfully, and as he reached up, he felt a sticky wetness, blood. His vision was blurry, but through the haze, he could make out the faint glow of the moonlight seeping in through a shattered window. Struggling to sit up, Ryan realized his hands were tied behind his back, and his legs were bound tightly with thick rope. Panic surged through him as he tried to make sense of what had happened. The last thing he remembered was hearing that strange noise and then a sudden blinding pain before everything went dark. As he looked around, he noticed the empty room was eerily quiet, save for the faint creaking of the old wooden beams above. He tried to shout, but his voice came out as a hoarse whisper. There was no one to hear him. He was alone and trapped. Just as he was about to give in to despair, he heard footsteps approaching. Slow and deliberate, the sound echoed through the stillness, sending a chill down his spine. The door creaked open, and Chief Alan Hawthorne stepped into the room, his face shadowed in the dim light. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as Alan walked closer, his eyes cold and unfeeling. He was holding something in his hand, a metal gas canister. Ryan's breath caught in his throat as he realized what was happening. "Chief, what are you doing?" Ryan's voice was barely a croak. Alan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked around Ryan, the canister clinking ominously with each step. He poured a line of gasoline around the perimeter of the room, the acrid smell filling the air. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost serene. "Do you know what betrayal feels like, Ryan?" Alan asked, his eyes fixed on the growing puddle of gasoline. "It's like a fire that consumes everything in its path. It eats away at your soul until there's nothing left." Ryan struggled against his bindings, his mind racing. "Please, Chief, you don't have to do this. We can talk about it. I'm sorry. I never meant to." "Don't lie to me," Alan roared, his composure cracking for the first time. He knelt down beside Ryan, his face inches away from his, eyes blazing with fury. "You seduced my wife. You destroyed everything I built. You made me look like a fool." Ryan shook his head desperately. "It wasn't like that. But Alan wasn't listening. He stood up and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small lighter. He flicked it open, the tiny flame flickering in the dim room. "You took everything from me, Ryan. So now I'm going to take everything from you." Before Ryan could say another word, Alan dropped the lighter onto the gasoline-soaked floor. The flames erupted instantly, racing along the line of fuel, encircling Ryan in a blazing inferno. The heat was intense, and the smoke began to fill the room, choking him. Ryan screamed, struggling frantically against the ropes that held him. He twisted and thrashed, his skin blistering from the searing heat, but it was no use. The flames were too fast, too fierce. The fire roared around him, devouring everything in its path. Alan watched silently from the doorway, his face expressionless as the flames consumed the room. He felt no remorse, no guilt, only a cold, hollow satisfaction. He had planned this meticulously, ensuring there would be no trace of his involvement. The farmhouse was far enough from town that no one would hear Ryan's screams. By the time the fire department arrived, it would be too late. As the fire grew, the structure began to groan under the strain. The roof beams creaked and cracked, sending embers and debris showering down. Ryan's screams became weaker, his struggles slowing as the smoke and heat overwhelmed him. And then, with a deafening crash, the roof caved in, burying Ryan in a torrent of flaming wood and debris. Alan turned away from the inferno, his face bathed in the orange glow of the flames. He walked slowly back to the fire truck, his heart pounding, but his mind eerily calm. He had taken care of everything. Ryan's death would be ruled an accident, a tragic end for a reckless young firefighter who had made a fatal mistake. He got to the truck and drove away, the blazing farmhouse disappearing in the rearview mirror. As he drove, he rehearsed the story he would tell the authorities, how Ryan had insisted on going in alone, despite his warnings, how he had tried to save him, but the fire was too intense. It was a tragedy, a terrible loss for the department, but accidents happen. The drive back to town was long and silent. Alan's thoughts turned to Emily. He would deal with her later. For now, he needed to focus on covering his tracks, making sure there were no loose ends. As he pulled into the fire station, he saw the other firefighters gathered outside, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights of the engines. They looked at him with a mix of confusion and concern. He took a deep breath and stepped out of the truck, his expression grave. "Chief, where's Ryan?" one of them asked, his voice tinged with worry. Alan shook his head, his eyes downcast. "There was an accident. The building collapsed. I'm sorry. Ryan's gone." A collective gasp went through the crowd, followed by murmurs of shock and disbelief. Alan felt a pang of something, regret maybe, but he pushed it down. He had made his choice. There was no turning back now. As the news spread through the town, the shock and sorrow were palpable. Ryan had been well liked, a hero in the eyes of many. His death was a tragedy that left a gaping hole in the community. But Alan remained stoic, his grief a mask he wore with practiced ease. The investigation was brief. The fire marshal's report concluded that the fire was accidental, likely caused by a faulty gas line in the old farmhouse. There was no mention of foul play, no suspicion cast in Alan's direction. He had played his part perfectly. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks began to show. Emily's grief was real and raw, and she was inconsolable. She had loved Ryan in her own way, and the guilt gnawed at her. She knew Alan had found out about the affair, but she couldn't believe he would do something so monstrous until she found the lighter. The lighter was small and silver, engraved with the initials RC. It was unmistakably Ryan's, a gift Emily had given him during one of their secret meetings. She found it hidden in the back of Alan's closet, tucked away under a pile of old clothes. As soon as she saw it, her heart sank. The realization of what had happened hit her like a punch to the gut. Ryan hadn't died in an accident. Alan had killed him. Trembling with shock and fury, Emily clutched the lighter, her mind racing. How could she have been so blind? She had known Alan was angry when he discovered the affair, but she never imagined he would go this far. She knew she had to act quickly and carefully. Alan was dangerous, and if he found out she knew the truth, he might come after her next. She decided to go to the police, but she needed more evidence. The lighter was a start, but it wouldn't be enough to convince them. She needed proof that Alan had been at the farmhouse, that he had planned the murder. Her hands shaking, she went to Alan's study and booted up his computer. She knew he kept records of everything, and she hoped he had made a mistake. After a few minutes of searching, she found it. An email to an anonymous tip line sent from a burner account. It was the same email that had lured Ryan to the abandoned farmhouse. Emily's stomach churned as she read the cold, calculated words. Alan had set the whole thing up, knowing exactly what he was doing. Her mind made up. She printed the email and slipped the paper into her purse. She grabbed the lighter and headed for the door, her heart pounding in her chest. But as she reached for the doorknob, it turned from the outside. Alan stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing as he saw the fear on her face. He glanced down and saw the lighter in her hand. His expression hardened. "What are you doing, Emily?" His voice was low, dangerous. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. "I know what you did, Alan. You killed him. You murdered Ryan." Alan's face twisted with rage. He deserved it. He ruined everything, and so did you. He stepped closer, his fists clenched. "I gave you everything, Emily, and you threw it all away for him." She tried to steady her voice, but it came out as a shaky whisper. "You're a monster." He moved fast, grabbing her wrist and twisting it painfully until she cried out and dropped the lighter. It clattered to the floor, the sound echoing ominously in the quiet house. Alan shoved her back, his eyes blazing with fury. "I did what I had to do," he growled, "and I'll do it again if I have to." Emily's eyes widened with fear as she realized what he meant. He was going to kill her too. She turned and bolted for the back door, but Alan was right behind her. She barely made it to the kitchen before he tackled her to the ground. They struggled, her screams piercing the silence as he pinned her down, his hands closing around her throat. She kicked and clawed, her vision blurring as she fought for breath. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the kitchen counter, and she grabbed the first thing she found, a heavy cast-iron skillet. Summoning the last of her strength, she swung it upward, smashing it into Alan's head. He let out a grunt of pain and staggered back, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. Emily scrambled to her feet, gasping for air. She swung the skillet again, hitting him in the shoulder. He stumbled, his eyes wide with shock and fury. "You bitch!" he hissed, lunging at her again. But this time, she was ready. She sidestepped, grabbing a kitchen knife from the counter. Alan charged at her, and she plunged the knife into his side. He gasped, his eyes widening in shock as he crumpled to the floor. Emily stood over him, her chest heaving as she watched the life drain from his eyes. She dropped the knife, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She backed away, her heart pounding in her ears as she realized what she had done. The room was silent, save for the sound of her ragged breathing. Alan lay motionless on the floor, his blood pooling around him. Emily felt a sob rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She didn't have time to break down. She had to call the police, explain what had happened. She reached for the phone, her hands still trembling, and dialed 911. As she waited for the operator to pick up, she glanced down at Alan's lifeless body. The man who had once been her husband, who had destroyed everything they had, was gone. "It's over," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's finally over." The police arrived within minutes, and Emily was taken into custody. She told them everything, from the affair to the murder plot to the final confrontation in the kitchen. They listened, their faces grim, and when she showed them the evidence she had gathered, they believed her. The town was shocked by the news. The fire chief, the man they had all trusted and admired, had turned out to be a cold-blooded killer. Ryan's death was no longer seen as a tragic accident, but as a calculated act of revenge. Emily's role in his death, her own desperate fight for survival, became the talk of the town. In the end, Emily was cleared of any wrongdoing. It was ruled as self-defense, a tragic but just end to a terrible chapter in her life. She left the town soon after, unable to bear the memories that haunted every corner. For the fire department, it would never be the same. The shadow of the chief's actions loomed over them, a dark reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. And the town, once so peaceful, would forever be scarred by the knowledge that even in the quietest places, darkness could lurk just beneath the surface.